the eerie silence of February, as darkness falls over a secluded Catholic school, horrifying secrets begin to be revealed in this psychological horror story that will take us on a heart-shaking journey full of mystery into a thrilling darkness. The story opens showing a girl's dream, where she sees that her mother's car is damaged. This girl is Catherine, one of the new students who lives in the Brentford Catholic School dormitory. When Catherine woke up, she immediately marked the 21st on the calendar, which today is the last day of school learning activities, so the plan is that on the second day, Catherine's parents will come to pick her up for the school holiday. Then Catherine went to Pastor Brian to convey her hope that the pastor could attend her piano performance, but unfortunately the pastor would go to Albania until the holiday period was over, so he couldn't fulfill Catherine's request. For a moment, Catherine looked away and smiled at something in front of her, which made the priest confused, and asked, but Catherine didn't seem to realize what she had just seen. In the end, Catherine just prayed that Pastor Bryant would arrive safely and have fun there. At the same school shows another student named Rose. At that time, parents were seen starting to arrive to pick up their children. Meanwhile, Rose went into the hall to watch Catherine's piano performance. Catherine kept her eyes wide open, hoping that her mother would be there to watch her performance. After they were finished, the two of them were called to the principal, Mr. Gordon. Because their parents hadn't come to pick them up, Catherine couldn't give a reason. She didn't know and just thought maybe her parents would come on her birthday. Meanwhile, Rose said that her parents would come on Friday. But in reality, Rose had her own reasons why she wanted to stay in this dormitory. Because their parents didn't pick them up, Russia and Catherine would of course stay in the dormitory with the school guards. Gordon asked Rose, as an old student, to look after Catherine until her parents came to pick them up. In the evening, Catherine came to Rose's room. She found Rose dressed up to go out with her lover. Catherine reminded Rose of Mr. Gordon's message that Rose had to stay in the dormitory to look after her. But Rose didn't care. Rose didn't seem to want to accompany Catherine. She just told Catherine T. Then Rose started telling about the nuns who wore wigs. There wasn't a single hair on their bodies. A student named Jane Darling once testified that she caught the nuns in the basement burning all their hair for the sake of a cult ritual. Rose stopped the discussion and left with her boyfriend, leaving Catherine alone in the dormitory. Not long after Rose left, Catherine went into her room, where Catherine found a comb filled with loose hair and a document with a photo of Rose. Her attention was diverted when she heard the telephone ringing from the living room.
Di tempat lain, malam itu seorang gadis bernama Joan baru saja tiba di terminal, masih dengan menggunakan gelang rumah sakit yang menandakan bahwa ia adalah seorang pasien yang kabur dari.
With her 2 coins, Joan tried to call someone, but the phone didn't connect. At the bus stop, a man named Bill came to greet Joan, knowing that Joan was going to the postman's. Bill offered a lift so that Joan would go with him. Meanwhile, Rose, who had just returned, heard a voice coming from downstairs, thinking that it was Catherine. Rose followed the voice's footsteps until she reached the bottom of a room. Rose saw Catherine making strange movements. Joan woke up in an inn room after taking a shower. Bill came to visit Joan, who was tired because, according to Bill, Joan had fallen asleep during the trip. There, Bill talked about himself looking for God. Through a strange incident and a small coincidence, Bill admitted that when he saw Joan, it was like seeing his daughter, who had died 9 years ago. This looked strange, but Bill felt that he had seen God within himself. Joan. Bill couldn't ignore this coincidence, So Bill was willing to take his soul to Portsmouth, even though Bill and his wife Linda were actually going to Brainford, a city that existed before Portsmouth. John was silent for a moment and then said that they had to leave immediately, so Bill asked him to be ready, so they would leave in the early hours of the morning. Returning to the dorm, Rose had taken Catherine back to her room. At that time, Catherine warned Mr. Gordon again, telling Rose to look after her. This made Rose feel guilty, but Catherine said that Rose had missed her chance. Catherine no longer needs Rose to accompany her. It seems that now Catherine already has other friends. So Catherine says that her parents will never come because they are actually dead. Russ looked shocked to hear that. So Russ asked Catherine to rest and then left his room. Then the scene shows Joan acting strangely in bed at the restaurant. Joan meets Bill. There, Bill gives a photo of his daughter to Joan, which turns out to be Rose. For a moment, Joan said goodbye to the toilet. For some reason, Joan seemed to be laughing at something. Then Joan took out an identity card from a woman named Joan Mars. Then for a moment, the image flashed of a woman strangled. So here it could be suspected that Joan had finished off this woman. Then in the car, Linda said that Bill always thought the girl he met was their daughter. Linda asked Joan to understand because Bill felt deep sadness after losing his daughter. That morning, when Rose woke up from her sleep, she found that Catherine had just finished calling. Catherine admitted that the call was from Mr. Gordon, who asked Catherine to stay with her. And Catherine also said that Mr. Gordon would soon come to the dormitory. At the dining table with Rose Drake and Prescott. But at that time, Catherine said insulting words, then Catherine experienced vomiting. So they immediately took Catherine to her room. There, Rose asked for a telephone call from Mr. Gordon. But the press good said that Mr. Gordon never called the hostel again. In the room, surprisingly, Catherine said this inappropriate sentence, which was strange. Catherine seemed like she was no longer herself. Suddenly the phone rang. Drake picked up the call from Mr. Gordon, who said that he would soon arrive at the dormitory. This was quite surprising. Rules where Catherine proved her words. Therefore, Rose was given the order to clear the snow in the yard. Then Rose went back to rest a few moments later. The scene showed Mr. Gordon, who had just arrived at the dormitory yard. He slowly entered and was shocked when he saw the dormitory was quiet, messy, and lots of blood was splattered out. For a moment, the scene returns to the beginning of the film, showing several scenes that were also missed to explain what and how all this could happen. That morning, when Catherine woke up, she marked the 21st on the calendar, which was the last day of school. Catherine took a shower and then took 2 coins to call her parents, which at first glance was similar to the activity carried out by Joan. From behind the phone there was a man's groaning voice, saying that his parents would never come, and then ordering Catherine to finish off all the girls there. After class, Catherine was stunned to see something in front of her. In the evening after Rose left, while checking Rose's room, Catherine was stopped by a phone call which turned out to be from the previous man. The man reminded Catherine again to finish off all the girls. Everything went as before, until that night the whispers affected Catherine so that Catherine killed Prescott and Dream. While Catherine left him alive. In her room, Rose, who had just woken up, didn't know about Drake's death and Prescott. For a moment, she stood in front of the mirror looking at her stomach, which was starting to grow. So that here it was discovered that the reason Rose didn't want to be picked up by her parents was to keep her pre. When in the bathroom, Ruth heard several voices, then came out to check When she got downstairs, Ruth found Rick and the press code lying lifeless. Ross was afraid he intended to come back, but he was shocked when he found Catherine suddenly in front of him with a knife. Without saying much, Catherine repeatedly swung the knife until Rose died in her hands. After that, Catherine got rid of the 3 bodies and took their heads to the basement. When Mr. Gordon arrived with the guard, he found a lot of blood. Immediately searched the room until the officer saw Catherine sitting with the heads of her 3 victims without fear. Catherine stood up to challenge the officer with the knife still in her hand, so the officer had no choice but to let go. Catherine woke up in a mental hospital tied to Pastor Bryant. In front of her, at that time, Bryant, who suspected that there was an evil demon residing in her body, immediately made efforts to exorcise it. Before long, the demon was seen coming out. But Catherine didn't want him to leave. Catherine. The scene returns to Bill and Linda's family, which is now known that this scene is set 9 years after Rose's death in the hostel. It is also known that it turns out that Joan is Catherine, who managed to escape from a mental hospital and then took the identity of a nurse named Joan Mars. They were on their way to drop off Joan or Catherine. When they entered Brainford City, Catherine asked Bill to stop the car because Catherine was so fed up that Bill pulled over. But suddenly Catherine pulled out a knife and killed Bill, then repeatedly stabbed Linda until she died. Then Catherine took her suitcase and walked towards the school dormitory, which was now abandoned. Catherine went through every room until she stopped at the burning room, where she took the heads of her 3 victims. There Catherine was silent. She stared at the burning stove as if she regretted her act. This film seems to depict that Catherine has been possessed by an evil demon, but in fact this is not the case. This film tells about the lonely longing and mental illness suffered by Catherine after the death of her mother in a car accident and possibly also her father. Although this film does not. Catherine is more or less aware of the mental disorder she suffers from. Therefore, Catherine needs a friend in her loneliness, but Rose just ignores her from Ruth's story about the underground cult ritual. Catherine goes down to find a cure for her loneliness. Until Catherine feels that she has a friend, Catherine no longer wants Rose to be her friend. This is illustrated by Catherine's words that Rose has missed her chance to be her friend, while the phone call and voice that influenced her to kill may have just been a hallucination that she created herself. Because of this incident, Catherine underwent treatment at a mental hospital because Catherine was suffering from mental illness. So the exorcism carried out by Pastor Bryant was not successful. So Catherine spent the last 9 years of her life in a mental hospital. He ran away after killing a nurse named Joan Mars, then returned to the basement of the dormitory to meet the devil, who he thought was his only friend. Even though at the end of the film, Catherine was seen crying, but her illness was not necessarily cured. Catherine was still alone and still lonely. That's all. I apologize for all the shortcomings and mistakes in terms of mentions, as well as spoken words, that are not pleasing to the hearts of all my friends. Finally, I say goodbye and see you in the next film storyline.